In this video, I'm going to show an example of how I create scenarios for the Memoir 44 VASSAL module. The scenario I've chosen for this video is the first one from the VE Day scenarios, released by Days of Wonder recently. And I'm going to be using the Memoir 44 10.11 module. I'm not going to be using this PDF. I'm going to look up the ID here, which is 16,303. And then look up the scenario setup page on the Memoir 44 website. So this is what we're going to use. I'm also going to be using a text editor. I'm using BBEdit. You can also use Text Wrangler or Text Edit in text-only mode. Or if you're on Windows, you can use Notepad or Notepad++, anything that edits text plain, no styling. I already have text here in my document, which is the template that I reuse when I create new scenarios. You are most likely not going to have any text in there. So the easiest thing you could do is to go into the Memoir 44 module and choose a scenario. I'm going to choose one at random here. Not that one. A plain scenario. That one might work. Load it. And then what is new in the version of the module is that the scenario text is no longer under the scenario button. So if I click on the scenario viewer, you're going to get an HTML view of the scenario notes. That's very nice for play, but what we're looking for here is the pencil button, which gives the raw text. So what you would do is you would select all of this and then copy it to your text document to use as a template. I already have a template, so I will be using that. So the first step for me usually is to create the scenario text. So I use the web page for that, and I copy paste a lot. The previous scenario had a series, which this one doesn't, so I'm going to remove the Normandy, and then I'm going to copy paste the title of the scenario. After that is going to be a space dash space and the date of the scenario, which in this case is January 16, 1945. And the second line is for a subtitle, which this one doesn't have, but this scenario does have an operation name, which I'm going to place in round brackets after the title of the scenario. And then there's one blank line to the next label, which is historical background. Now the module parses the scenario text to render the HTML view. So it is quite important that it follows certain conventions of white spaces and where things are. So the label here should be there and one white line in front of it. So historical background is what it looks for, and then it's going to be the general description of the scenario. I'm going to delete the one that's there already. The line, the stage is set, red lines are drawn, you're in command, the rest is history, is standard, so I keep it for all the scenarios. Then I'm going to select the text here on the web page, copy and paste it here. Don't need to worry about wrapping because the HTML takes care of that. So we have the description here. Then there's two white lines to the next label, briefing. Now it's important that the white space here is two lines because otherwise the parser will not recognize that the description has ended, since there can be white space in between paragraphs. Then the axis always comes first, so it's going to be axis player, and then in square brackets it's going to be the name of the side, the nation that is being played here. So in this scenario it is Germany versus United States, so we have it here in the briefing, so Germany can stay Germany. Then it's going to be a colon, and then take X command cards. So that's also important. It parses that text to recognize how many cards should be drawn. And in this case it is 5, so we can leave 5 there. Then a white line, and then allied player, the side United States, that's also correct, and take 5 command cards. And then we have the line you move first, which comes on a separate line. Now this can either be with the allied player as it is now, or it could be with the axis player as such. I think the parser assumes there's going to be only one. And then there's again a double white line, double empty line, and then conditions of victory is the next label which the parser looks for. And in this case there are 7 medals, so I'm going to put 7 medals here. Now if the number of medals differs between the axis and allied side, I would again put axis first and then allies as such and show a different number of metals. If the metals are the same for both sides, just putting the metals like this is sufficient. And then the description of metal objectives. So this text here does not apply, so I'm going to copy paste what is here in the scenario page, which is quite a long text in this scenario, which describes the towns of Hatton and Rittershoven as being permanent metal objectives. Okay, again, 2 line feeds, and then the next label, special rules, which should always be there. Even if the scenario does not have any special rules, the label should still be there, and you should write none. If you leave it out, it's going to think there's something wrong with the scenario description. So in this case we have some special rules. I'm going to copy paste all of them and put them in here, and then I'm going to edit them. They're most likely pretty good. It says place a badge. I tend to remove those since we are not actually placing badges, because that's already been done. So I just say Axis Elite Infantry and Axis Engineer Units. Now I like to always put these labels here, as Days of Wonder does nowadays as well, and some of the scenarios from the front do. If they are not in there, I will manually add them in there, and the parser will also recognize them and color them appropriately. Place a badge or use proper figures, so that's not applicable because we already will use proper figures. Special weapon assets are in effect, that's fine. Yes, and then the allied player may conduct airstrikes, that's fine, arrows are not in effect. So now this is the entire description of the scenario, so I'm going to copy the whole thing and then use it in the module. So now I'm going to go to the module, and then I'm going to create a new game. Now it's important when you create a scenario setup that you should never save it as being a particular site. It should always be saved as observer. Otherwise, when people play your scenario, they will be locked out of the site that you saved on. And then the boards. For the Memoir 44 module, you have to use a specific combination of boards to have all the components properly there. So on the left, we are going to have a normal inland board. Then we're going to add a column and put a sideboard and add a row and have a compendium panel, which is where we're going to place the compendium cards. So this is pretty straightforward. Some of the other boards can be a little more tricky to set up correctly, all the components and panels. Now I'm going to make this a bit less wide so we can still see the web page next to here. I also have 2 screens, but I'm not recording both of them, so I'm going to do it this way. And I'm going to open the pieces panel, which we're going to use. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I forget is I'm going to go into the scenario editor, and I'm going to paste the text we just created and apply to make sure that it is there. We can also open the scenario viewer here. We can see that it renders the sides correctly. We can see there's actually a typo here on the scenario page. It should be actions, not action. So we'll quickly fix that and apply. See, actions, okay. So it's all there. We have the number of size, starting player, and the historical background. It recognizes the operation name, so that's all good. Then I will copy paste these 2 together. Command C or Control C. Then I right click here on the left to change the label of the scenario. I'm going to paste in scenario title. And then the scenario subtitle, there's a specific format which I use, which is I first write the front, which this is on, which in this case is Western, then space dash space, then the short month and year, which is Jan 45, space dash space. If the scenario has an operation name, I will put it in here. If it does not, I will just write nothing. I do not tend to write subtitles here, only operation names. So Unternehmen Nordwind. And then I always put at the end space and a hash sign or pound sign and an ID number of the web page. So as we saw earlier on the PDF, and as we can see in the URL as well, not on my browser, but in general, 16,303. This ID here is not only useful for players to find the web page, to enter statistics and such, but it's actually also parsed by the renderer. Not right now, I have to update the render, so let's just put a space here, apply, and remove the space and apply. So it forces it to refresh. It will actually put a link here at the bottom, which was not there before, and if we click this, it will actually open a web browser and take us to the Memoir page on the Days of Wonder site. So that's very convenient. So then we'll set up the rest. The default here is 5 starting cards, so we don't have to change that. We do have to change the starting player, so I will shift click the turn bar, right click, and do change player, so that it's clear the allied side starts. We also don't have to change the medal spots for the sides, because it's Germany versus United States, but it is 7 medals to victory and not 6. So the first thing I'll do there is to go to the Setup VP tab, and then use this component here, which is a medal placeholder. Now it looks slightly different than the default board. You can see the colors are not exactly the same. So I will tend to override the default ones, even if they're the same kind of medal, just to make it look more consistent. Then you can cycle through these with increase, decrease, or I will use the keyboard shortcuts, control square brackets, to go to the other side. So this is Germany, there's also Russia, Britain, Italy, Japan, and allies, which are not used anymore for if the allies play from the top of the board. Recently I changed the convention in the module that the allied side will always be at the bottom and the Axis side always be at the top. This was to be able to support 3D figures, which are no longer being made, but I'm still sticking with the convention. Another thing that I sometimes do beforehand, sometimes I do after, is to place the compendium cards. I think I will do it after, because sometimes I add some for the terrain. So we are done with the scenario text for now. So then we go actually look at the scenario setup here. Okay. So we're going to start doing the setup of the terrain. So we're going to just follow here the order set by the scenario page. I'm going to go to terrain, inland, and then we have hedgerows. So there should be 7. And I will just start placing them as per the instructions. So there's 1 here. And then instead of doing right-click clone, I will just press Ctrl-C, which is a lot faster. And I will tend to count the tiles 2, 3, 4, 5, 2 more on the left, 6, 7, to see if I'm matching the 7 here to make sure I don't accidentally skip one. So then we go to hills, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then there should be 1 more, which is on the right here, 11. And then we have 12 woods or forests, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2 more, 11, and 12. And then finally 6 towns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, some sandbags, but I'll do those later. I'll first do the labels. I tend not to do any overlaying terrain, such as sandbags or wire or hedgehogs, until after I've done the labels, because the labels will actually go underneath those, and they're more difficult to select and move around if I've already placed sandbags and such. So I will place a town label here, Ctrl-L to rename it, Hutton, and then I will Ctrl-C to copy and drag it to the other side. I think I'll place it here, and Ctrl-L to rename that as well. Those are the only labels in this scenario. So then next we have the sandbags. I will place those. So we go to obstacles and then drag sandbag here, copy 2 more. And then we have the medals. And the conditions of victory has some special medal objectives in this scenario. It's a bit difficult to represent, but we do have set up edges, not actually edges, but VP, we have these victory point boundary markers. It's probably a good idea to mark the towns to make it more clear that the towns are involved in the victory conditions. Normally I would use these to mark areas with Control C and rotate. I would mark areas that contain medals, multiple medals, or are multi-hex objectives. In this case they are not multi-hex objectives, but it is probably still a good idea to mark them. So now I have to again move the sandbags because these VP hex sites will go underneath sandbags and I won't be able to clone or rotate them if they are underneath. So I will just mark off the towns. I just use Control C and Control square bracket to clone and rotate these, and then drag them to the next hex. And then I will also do this one. There we go. So then it's clear that these hexes belong to some sort of objective. And then finally the medals. So also in VP we have the medals. Now there are many different types of medals. So the default here is temporary, which is most often used. But if we right click the medal, we can see in the setup that we can have a majority, we can have an at turn start, permanent, sole control, last occupy, sudden death. So all the different types of medal objectives are represented. The temporary medal objective also has a capture. So this is an allied medal. So on the board what you would do is you would take the medal and then drag it to your victory place. The problem is with that is that you don't know anymore where the medal came from. So in the module you can actually right click a medal and do capture and then use the little captured medal. Then if you lose the objective you can simply delete the capture medal, right click the objective and say lose objective, and it's no longer marked. Anyway, so we have two of these for the towns. It doesn't really matter where they are since we have special garrison rules, so I'll just place them somewhere near the towns. I'll place this one here, and then I will Control C another one and place it over here. Okay, so that's actually all the terrain. The battle stars are attached to the units, so we don't place them as battle stars. So this is fairly simple terrain. Often this is a bit more involved. Then the units are not under pieces, they're actually in a separate panel, which is over here, units. So here we have all the different unit types, which doesn't include all the badge types. So it's possible that for some special nations or some special combinations in special scenario rules, that there's no preset unit. So what you would look for is the preset unit type, such as here paratrooper with 3 figures maximum, or special forces paratrooper with 4, you know, or special forces here with 4, with 3. You would take the correct base unit type, like for example Rangers. You say, okay, the badge is not correct. Then you can right click, go to markers, and you can go cycle through the badges with the square bracket control keys. So I can just cycle through the badges and say this one should be a, I don't know, a sniper special forces 4-figured unit. So you can make that way any combination of badge and unit type, even if it is not already in the units panel. But the most common ones are here, but you can get all combinations if you want to. So I'm just going to start selecting units and drag them into the scenario, and then use Control C to make copies, so I don't have to keep dragging them one by one. Makes it faster. We have some regular armor over here. We have an artillery piece. And then I'm going to take this armor and just clone it some more. And then the only special allied unit is the mobile artillery, which is over here. There we go. And then I'm going to use the mark unmoved to clean up all the movement lines. So there we go, that's the allied side. Then we'll go to the axis, to the opposing side. They have some half tracks. So let me find half tracks. There's no preset for a half track with 2 figures, so I'll just give it 1 hit. Now you see when I gave it 1 hit to make it a starting 2 figures, that it assigned 1 hit on the hit counter. So I'm going to have to click on the hit counter and right click and do decrease axis to bring it back to 0. Or later I can just use reset to put it back to 0, 0. So you don't want to leave any hits on that counter. I don't think I'll need to do any more hits. So there's some infantry here. I've actually forgotten the allied infantry in the towns behind the lines. So there's going to be an infantry here in Hutton, and then it needs a battle star. So instead of going to pieces and putting a battle star marker, this one, I'm going to actually right click the unit and say, let me see, markers, battle star, or Control G, and then it will get a little battle star attached to the unit. So if the unit moves, the battle star moves with it. It makes it easier. And then there's another one here, and then an artillery, and I'm also going to give it a marker battle star. Okay, so that's the allies done. Back to the axis. Let's see here. So there's an artillery here, an engineer, combat engineers, another infantry, and some special forces armor, and our infantry, and then we have anti-tank infantry, another combat engineers, and some special forces infantry, and another anti-tank. So let's say unmove all, and then check again, make sure I haven't forgotten anything, because that can happen. Okay, it seems I got everything. Okay, so that is all the terrain, all the pieces, all the markers, all the units. The only thing left then is the compendium cards. So I'm going to go to the compendium card window, and then I'm first going to go look through the special rules. So we have special action resupply, which action is 24. I'm going to place that there. I'm going to place it together with the half-track troops, which is 18, since action is done together with the troops. Then we got troops 2, which is not really necessary to place. Most people who play this are going to know what troops 2 do. Combat engineers I still tend to put down. Then we have 14, mobile artillery. It's useful to know. And then we have actions 3 I'm going to put somewhere on the left here, the airstrikes. And then the special weapon assets. So assets 4, late war. And we have anti-tank gun. So now we have one slot free, or 2 at a stretch. If I put one on top, I think probably I'll put hedgerows, since of the terrain, hedgerows is the one that has the most complicated rules. So let's just cycle through. That's terrain 4. I think forest and towns, people who are going to play this scenario by now are probably more familiar with it. So that's the entire scenario. So we got the units, terrain, compendium cards, and we have scenario text. So all we need to do now is save it as observer and just give it a name. Now you don't have to follow my convention for that, but since this is Western Front, I'll probably give a special code to VE Day scenarios since they are a collection. But normally Western Front would be WF, and then Hutton Juventus often .is and save. And that's it. That would be the scenario setup. Now, of course, when I make the module and the extensions, I would include this scenario setup in the extensions so that it comes into the scenario chooser. And also, when I update the module, I will update the scenario so that any new elements are in there. Now, if you create your own scenario setup and I update the module, there's a good chance that it will not work 100% anymore. You can try using the VASSAL tools to update scenarios. They're not in here. You have to actually edit the module. You can give that a try. It might work. It might not work. I've had mixed experiences with that. The main problem is probably going to be that not all components are always just straight updates. Like, for example, this hit counter here was added manually with my update process to all the scenarios, and it's not actually possible for you to add that yourself without recreating the entire scenario. So that's why most of the scenarios are created by me. But if you do want to create one, especially if you create it in this format using my template, then you could send it in to me and I could include it in the extension and you could get it updated by me. But anyway, this is how I create the scenarios. And there's still some other topics from other kind of scenario setups, breakthrough setups, and overlord that are not included here, but this is general lines. So enjoy.